Since the introduction of the DJI FPV drone, there has been a lot of interest surrounding FPV, which makes me happy because I like to fly FPV, and it makes it more enjoyable when so many of you are interacting with me because of this. Now, there's a love-hate relationship in the FPV world when it comes to this drone specifically, but today I'm not focusing on that. I want to focus on the things that I think that DJI needs to fix to make this a more enjoyable experience for the masses. Let's get started. What's good, everybody? Ken here, you're watching OriginaldoBo, and today we're gonna talk about the improvements I would like to see on the DJI FPV drone. Now, this has been out since March, and since March, we've only received one singular update for this quad, which hasn't really improved all that much. I take that back. It did give us the ability to map an arm switch to one of the switches, which I think that was actually a pretty good improvement. That actually made it easier to land in manual. But beyond that, they haven't done anything to improve the overall performance, at least from what I've seen, and they haven't done anything to improve the camera system. So in this video, I want to discuss some of the things I would like to see DJI do to make this a little bit more enjoyable and a better flight experience when we're using it. So let's start off with the performance aspect of this. I think there's a misconception from new users that changing your rates is tuning the drone. Changing your rates is not tuning anything. It's not fixing any underlying issues. It's essentially just how the drone reacts to your stick inputs. And unfortunately, if there's underlying problems as far as performance goes, no matter how your sticks input, you're still gonna have those problems underneath there. What I would like to see DJI do is create some form of presets depending on the style of flight you were performing. These presets don't necessarily have to touch your rates, but it can adjust how your PIDs interact with the drone and how the drone performs as far as a performance perspective goes. This hopefully could help mitigate some of that prop wash, the vibrations, the shudder, the underpowered feeling that this has. I know that this drone has much more to give. I've seen it when we first got these in our hands before the most recent update. This was performing what I would say relatively well. I know this can make a substantial amount of power. However, sometimes it just feels very sluggish and it just makes no sense. So it'd be nice to see DJI allow us to choose presets from an advanced user perspective, while still keeping it simple. You don't gotta give us a full-blown utility to allow us to tune this. Just provide us a couple of presets that allow us to let the drone perform a specific way. Similar to what you have with the Mavic, where you can slide it over into sport mode, cine mode, or standard mode. I think that would be super ideal. All right, let's talk about the camera on this, because I think the camera needs some work. It needs some love, unfortunately. So many people ask why I strap a GoPro to the top of the FPV drone. And the reason why I do this is because the dynamic range and the overall crunchiness of the DJI camera isn't all that appealing. Combined with Rocksteady, it just looks really, really peculiar. There are times where I think Rocksteady does an amazing job, but then there are times where I'm flying a similar flight and it just looks like shit, just being real. The camera has a really hard time exposing for both the shadows and the highlights. It either will blow out the highlights completely or crush the shadows entirely. And most of the time it's crushing the shadows, which tend to be, in the most, reasonably balanced, setting where it's a balanced lighting scenario. It's the weirdest and damnedest thing. And because of that, I have actually opted to utilize a GoPro on top. Not only using the GoPro on top fixes the stabilization issue, it also gives me a better balance point as far as ISO and color. The other thing to consider is because we are only using one camera system on the FPV drone, whatever changes we make to that camera are going to affect us visually. So if you're flying in D-Cine-alike, your visual feed is going to be a little bit less contrasty and a little bit more washed out. And because of that, you may not see all the objects coming into your path. So that's one of the reasons why I like to use a GoPro, because it allows me to keep my visual feed from the camera clear and contrasty so I can see what's in front of me, but also maintaining totally separate settings for the actual camera that's filming what you see as an end result. Now, is this something that could be fixable? I'm not sure. I think that maybe as far as the visual feed goes, DJI could apply a filter or a LUT. That way it's not burning into the final image if you're flying in desync-alike, but actually allows you to have better visibility. I also think there needs to be camera shortcuts to get to the camera settings a little bit quicker when you are wanting to adjust things on the fly. Right now, I feel like they're just a little bit too buried and they don't really want you adjusting. So that's just something I've noticed, but hopefully that's something that DJI could correct in a future firmware update. The last thing I want to talk about is camera frame rates. Right now, the DJI FPV drone only shoots in 60 frames per second. While some of you may not find a problem with that, I find an issue with that when it comes to doing professional work or just doing work for clients. Using 60 frames per second means I'm dropping it in a timeline where the sequence don't necessarily match. One, this affects motion blur, and two, sometimes this will cause images to slow down unnecessarily to where I don't want it to be slow. And if you speed those images up, it can create a stutter. So I would like to see a 30 frames per second option. I don't think it's that hard to do, and I really don't think it's that much of an ask to have a 30 frames per second option as far as recording goes. Again, my gripes are really minimal with this drone after using it for several months. I still think even after destroying several of these, I enjoy it. I'm just not being as daring with this one as I have in the past because I don't want to break this one. I've already broken, this is now the fourth one we've had. But as far as long range, it's really hard to beat. The safeguards and the overall usability sort of make it very, very tempting. But there you go. I would love to know what you would like changed as far as firmware or software goes with this drone. If there's something I missed, let me know in the comments section down below. Maybe you don't have any of these problems. Maybe you're perfectly happy with the way everything is with this drone. But either way, I'll see you in the next video. Stay original. So this is an interesting sign right here. This is now the second one of these I've seen. And it says, great white sharks hunt the seals in shallow water at this beach.